The only regret I will have in dying is if it is not for love. Well, Gabriel Garcia Marquez is loved and will be remembered for generations to come. The Nobel Prize-winning author died on Thursday at the age of 87. He had been unwell for quite some time. But the author brought in a revolution in Spanish literature, and he actually introduced the concept of magical realism to the world. It is also said that he did not chronicle only the culture and times of one country, but that of an entire continent. Welcome to India Post Live. We are in a conversation about the writing, about the man, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Joining me in the studio is Assistant Professor N.P. Ashley. He teaches literature at St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. We will also be joined in by other guests on Google Hangout and on Skype. If all of you are watching, please join in on Google Hangout or on Skype. Please send us your tweets. We will be very happy to talk about the man who has done so much for world literature. We are also going to talk about how his writing has influenced literature not only in his own country, not only in Latin America, but also around the world and of course India. So Ashley, thank you so much for coming to the studio. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. You have taught Marquez.
Yeah.
Tell us your first impressions when you start talking about him. Does the word magical realism come in right at the beginning, or is it something much beyond that?
It does, because magic realism is because it's so obsessively connected with Marquez. So you keep talking about this.
Yes.
But I think, it's also an impediment to start working with Marquez in some sense, because people are so taken in by the technique without and the fantasy of it, without really going into the politics of it, the history of it, and what he's trying to do with that form. For example, now that we're talking on the day of his demise, which definitely is sad but in some sense, it's been expected for some time.
Yes.
He's been ill and all that. But I would want to think of Marquez as the first global writer we had. And what do I mean by the first global writer? We've had universal writers, like writers who are based in a country and then for political reasons, for cultural reasons, for economic reasons, they get universalized because, Shakespeare is a universal writer. He's a very British writer of the 16th century, and then 15th, 16th century, who gets then taken up by the entire world for other reasons. But Marquez is writing his first major book in 1967. That's the time during which the world is the 500 years of Eurocentrism has ended by 1940s, and by late 1960s there is a feeling that the world is going to open up, and 2/3 of the world, which was only treated as natives, have become citizens at that point.
Right.
So I think Marquez is a global writer in that he's actually addressing this problem of this 2/3 of the world, and he's actually writing against the Eurocentric notions of literature, culture, people, and so on. So magic realism is not, in fact, he keeps saying that it's not something that I invented. This
And
is
he even says the surrealism that that is in his writing comes from his influence from Latin America.
Yeah, because he says this is how my grandmother used to talk to me.
Yes,
right?
stories, superstitions,
stories.
and ghost
So
stories.
all of that is part of our lives.
Yes.
But you have a certain way of looking at reality which makes the fantastic, the magical stay out of it. And you say this is the rational real, and that is the fantastic, that's the magical, that's different. And you have science fiction, which is actually giving a rational explanation for fear and so on and so forth. So what he's trying to do is he's merging these categories, which are created for a certain specific purpose. So magic realism is actually anti-realism, which sees the world from a certain perspective, where you say this is the world and the entire world will be standardized along these lines. So and he's trying to include Latin America into the narrative. 1970, the year in which Marquez book was translated by Gregory Rabassa into English is the very year in which
100 years of solitude, for which he won the Nobel.
Yeah. And that was the year in which Neruda got the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
Now, what is interesting here is all over the world there is some kind of attention going to to Latin America. I mean, 1959 is Cuba, but 67 is the year in which Che Guevara gets killed. So there's a certain sense in which the Latin American experience is providing you a counter model to work with historically.
The geopolitics of Latin America.
Latin America is very, very important. So, and then suddenly there's an interest in Neruda, there's an interest in Marquez, all over the world. And this is because there's a politics that is fitting this. That's the argument when I say he's the first global writer, because he gets read like that, right? Neruda is, but he's a poet. So, and he like you said, one of the things I would want to pick on is this whole idea of writing for a continent. I mean, he's writing from Colombia. He never says that. He says, I am a Latin American.
Exactly.
The civilization's only uniting thing is this colonialism. So he's very sensitive to the idea that we've had this history and we have to do something.
He was also in exile for several years, right? He lived...
See, he sees his personal exile, and the thing is, he's blending many things at the same time.
Right.
I mean, his writings, for example, his first important book, which makes him a novelist from a journalist, is the story of a shipwrecked sailor, which actually is a report.
Yes.
Right.
It started off as a journalistic piece.
And then it just went on to becoming something else.
Yes.
So there is a certain way in which he is trying to, walk across these, completely cocoon marooned areas seamlessly, which I think is the interesting thing about him. And in that he's trying to create a counter model, right? When he's talking about a village, a city space, he's actually trying to give you a counter model, which tries to be true to the Latin American experience, but it also tries to understand its past in opposition to what is provided to them as their past by the colonial, be that Spanish and later be that American, all these models. So there is a way in which his politics is entwined with his literature, which is usually kept aside.
He has also been known to be flamboyant as well as melancholic. We will talk about that. I think we have a caller joining us on Google Hangout. We have Amit Shankar with us. Amit Shankar is an author who has written Flight of Hilsa. Amit, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation. He has written a book called Flight of Hilsa, which talks of, can fame actually bring happiness? Amit, let me first ask you, how has Gabriel Marquez's writing influenced you as a writer?
Well, the writer who wants to be a writer ought to have read him. Not only because he can write like no one else, but because he was one of those few writers who probably was inspired by his surroundings, but he took the point of view to a new level.
Yes.
If you look at the writers whom we read, we'll see them writing about what happens around us. But this guy, he took his observation to a new level and he probably made a new genre of the writing. And the beauty of his writing was that it was a very powerful and potent mix of imagination, of surrealism,
yes,
and of bites and bits of reality also. So he was probably the only writer which we have read or which we have known of who could take a plot, a simple village, a simple story of a man and woman or of a couple to an entirely new level. And this was the power of this man who redefined storytelling to a new level. And I wish if I could write even a page like him, and the day if I could write a page like him, I'll think myself to be blessed.
So what you're trying to say is that through his writing, it was simplistic, yet it took it to a new level. It was it was in a way chronicling the times during which he lived, but through the surrealism, through the magic realism, he took it to a new level. So basically, his writing has been described as, something that could heighten your reality, something that could heighten your reality with its flamboyance, with its melancholy. Give us a little synopsis, if you will, of some of his other books and how this really comes across to the viewers, to the readers.
I think yes, it does. It's very flamboyant because it's very unapologetic about anything.
Yes.
Right, and he's a chronicler, and that's his other.
He
book,
started his
Chronicler.
career as a journalist, and that.
And
comes
he's
across.
aware that the ways in which we can chronicle the world
Yes.
are limited by a series of things. For example, you can't write anything new about Latin America because a lot of it has already been written. So what you are going to do is you're going to write on top of what is written, right? And then he, like I said, he claims all of it. And then gives it back to you, right? He says, okay, if you look at his writings, okay, this is what you say about Latin America. Fine, let me take all of that, and then he says, this is how you have created us, and then he takes it and gives it back to you, and then it's a very different thing. So in one sense, if you have to know a Latin American village, it's fantastic. It's like it's full of zombies and fairies and of some kind.
Yes.
But at the same time, that is you're dealing with a certain kind of
So
reality.
there is a fantasy in the
fantasy
reality.
level to it,
Yeah,
and there is a real in the fantastic,
Yes.
and there's a fantastic in the real. But that's how we live our lives, anyways, right? Because to think that our lives are very rational
Yes.
is actually a misconception. It's not
It's
at
not.
any point. But we have come to think of reality as a very rational thing because we are trained in a certain system. So that system of knowledge, that system of education, that perspective is what he's going against. For example, to give you one simple scene from the story of a shipwrecked sailor, where there's a scene where this person is left in the middle. He's at sea, in the middle of the sea for quite a long days, and then he sees somebody coming,
Right.
walking, and the person is not there because it's actually a mirage kind of a feeling. But what he's trying to, and when you read it, you actually think it's real, but towards the end, no, it's not. But so what is it? The hallucination is reality, isn't it? When you're experiencing
it's real for you.
It's real for
Yes,
you.
yes.
So can you communicate that? So how solid and how strong and how valid are our categorizations, right? And where are we getting these categories from? And that's one of the questions he asks. We have our experience, but our problem has been how to render our experience believable, our reality believable to the entire world. Now, the West has been, the European forces, the North Americans have been trying to assess us, but according to their scale. Can we have our scale? You've never asked us for our scales. You want it for yourself, but you want that scale for us. So that's what he says. That is the crux of our solitude, he says. We have an unbridled reality, an outsized reality, but we don't have a way of talking about it. We don't have a language. So he's trying to formulate a language, and that's not just a typical problem of Latin America. It's a problem of 2/3 of the world, which was once upon a time colony. So that's why he's such a global sensation to me.
All right. Amit, are you still with us? Amit, you would have just heard what Ashley has said. He gave us a wonderful scenario of his writing. Can you take off from there? Can you tell us more about how his writing, what you felt, what was the experience like just reading a Marquez? Amit, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was asking you, I think you just heard what Ashley was saying. He was talking about, he was, he was talking about how he conveyed the problems of the region, but in a very different manner. He kind of changed the whole scenario of literature through his writing. I mean, let's, to put it very simplistically. How was it for you? What was the experience for you like to read Marquez? Take us through that. What were the emotions that went on within you to read him?
To me, Marquez was a flamboyant painter.
A
A
flamboyant
painter,
painter. Marquez was a flamboyant painter, all right?
a painter who could create a scene so beautiful and so powerful and so lucid with his words that though surreal or though in the zone of magical and whatever, but somewhere deep down we all aspired that the scene could turn into reality. And that was the power of his writing and the power of his imagination, which took us very, I mean, simplest of the plot and simplest of people and simplest of flies, simplest of tales, and he turned it into such powerful metaphors that 1960s to 2014, his lines and his words and his characters and his whole genre of writing has stood the test of time. And it's not only for these 40 years or 50 years. Trust me, I mean, down the ages for the probably for
Yes.
the 100 or 2 years to come, his writing will be the tallest star of what an imaginative writer could do with words.
Right, and that is exactly, the writing will remain for centuries to come because of what you and Ashley have said. Let me quickly go across to, we have another person joining in the conversation, Pranav. Pranav has been a student of literature. He is now pursuing a doctorate. Pranav, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
Pranav, we are discussing the life and works of Gabriel Marquez. What has your experience been like while you read a Marquez?
I haven't read all his works, but a couple of works which I read, which was like story of a death foretold,
Yes.
Love in the Times of Cholera. Almost everything that I have read of him, I think, is one of the best storytellers in the world. Like, one of the things that matters as while I'm reading a story is how the story is told, how it unfolds. It doesn't matter whether it's a fantastic story, it doesn't matter if it's a realistic story or not. But as a student of literature, what really matters to me is how well it is told. And there, what I realize is Marquez is one of the most gripping storytellers ever. And there's where I rate him one of the best writers ever in the world. Uh, Besides that, what really was interesting about him, because I come from Bihar, my experience in Bihar is interesting in the sense that I come from a belt which is pretty badly infested by criminal activities, and so whenever you would read the stories, particularly story of a death foretold, the turn of the events, the way the relations are established between different characters in the story,
Right.
it would appear that there's some kind of resonance with what I actually saw, people being killed. One fine morning you get up in the get up and take a walk in the morning, and you see a dead body right in front of a temple. Now, these are real things that are happening all around us, but somehow we tend to ignore. Somehow we don't pay attention to those things. Interestingly, what Marcus did was he found out an interesting way of presenting these gory details of life in a way that would be interesting to almost any kind of reader from any background. Having said that, I do a couple of things that which have emerged in our conversation with Ashley particularly. He has made some really interesting observations with regards to the merits of Marquez's literature. I was just thinking about two of the points which Ashley had made, particularly his notion of global writer. This is something which I have been thinking for some time, and I still don't really have a good notion of what constitutes. I mean, who constitutes what are the traits on the basis of which we can identify a writer as a global writer? Like, some of the things that Ashley raised was his ability to bring out themes.
Pranav, what you talked of Bihar, the way you compared Marquez's writing to how you could identify your own experience of Bihar, I think that itself, Ashley, that itself makes him a global writer, isn't it? Where people who have actually experienced something similar can experience it. Pranav, I'm just going to cut you short there because we have another caller who's joining in on. We will be taking in another caller who's joining in on Skype very soon. But Ashley, let's now go into as a man, his political ideology, if you will. He was a left-wing, he was, convinced of the left politics. And his friendship with Fidel Castro, which actually began when he went to cover Castro's takeover or ousting of Batista in 1959. A very unusual friendship, a very long-lasting friendship. But tell us, what exactly influenced his politics?
No, I think that is actually connected to Pranav's question also. Why do we call him a global writer, and why would I think that there is a global politics in and the way he looks at it? It's global. It has its faults precisely because of that. The point is, like I said, in the late 60s, when Green Revolution, White Revolution, Blue Revolution, and many things like this are coming up, there's a way in which global capital is penetrating into every village, every part of the world in some sense. So in this process, what happens is there is a counter movement which is possible, which is what Marquez talks about when he's writing about these, like, there are these people who have been, the two-thirds that I've been talking about of the world, which needs to think about both its history and its, it's in a really nice, interesting cusp, because it has had 500 years of colonial rule, and it's actually just getting into the neo-colonial kind of period. So Marquez is one who's actually trying to say that, look, in all post-colonial societies, you have criminality, you have mafia, you have destabilization of power, you have, all that. Now, why is it happening? Because you had your organizations that are now defunct because of imperial powers. They've ruined it. You don't know what you're going for. So there's a kind of a uncertainty which is actually criminalizing societies. So, and this is when you are globalizing capital, you're globalizing these things, there is a counter move to that, which in fact can be traced. I think Marquez is the first of the lot. And to look at Marquez politics and Castro and all that, because in the 60s, the late 50s, 59, when he goes and meets Fidel Castro and all that, immediately after his victory, overthrowing Batista and becoming the president. During that period, what he's actually trying to, what is interesting about that entire this thing is, he is saying that there has to be, there is something like Cuba, which is posing a counter to something, so I will be with them, right? So now, if you are, and he's not dealing with politics only in the strictly intellectual or artistic manner. I mean, here is a person who was actually sent as an envoy, who was in charge of, Clinton, Castro discussion, right? So quickly, the point is there is a way in which if you're doing politics at that level, what happens?
Give me just 1 second, because we have a caller on Skype. We have with us Ira Trivedi, and Ira is a very well-known speaker, novelist, and she is also a yoga teacher. But more about her book, she has written The Great Indian Love Story, India in Love, Marriage and Sexuality, and What Would You Do to Save the World? Ira, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Thank you. I'm Nilanjana. We have with us Assistant Professor Ashley of St. Stephen's College. Tell us about your experience of Marquez as a writer yourself.
As a writer and as someone who has written love stories, I think, his stories have just been, to me, the most fascinating love stories. And I think that's what's really, really shaped my own writing. It shaped the way I thought about love. It shaped the way I perceived my own relationships. And I also feel like that's why his language was so universal. That's why people across the world loved him. It was because the language of love that he spoke and the relationships that he depicted were so strong that they carried forth across languages, communities, countries, and they were timeless love stories. So that was really my greatest learning from his work.
Your latest book, your latest work, There's No Love on Wall Street. Has Marquez's writing influenced your writing in any way?
Well, I think his writing has influenced all my work, from my very first novel, What Would You Do to Save the World, at 19. So that doesn't really talk about it's not really as much of a love story as my other books. My latest book, which is nonfiction, India and Love, I think I was really sort of extracting stories from across this country, and there were all sorts of deep, dark stories of sex, love, and marriage. And I definitely always kind of kept my favorite love stories, especially the sort of dark love stories that I read with Marquez. Love in the Time of Cholera remains my all-time favorite book, and how love can be ageless, can be timeless. That final scene from that book, I remember reading it 100 times, 100 times over. So I just feel like it's had this, the way Garcia has portrayed love has really always influenced the way I've looked at love in all of my different work.
Great. So you are saying that his writing transcends boundaries because love is in itself a universal
Absolutely.
phenomenon.
And the kind of human elements that he brings out in all of his books, whether it's 100 Years of Solitude, through generations of love stories, various different kinds of love, different relationships. I always felt like the best thing about his writing, they say he's really, the sort of Garcia defined a whole new genre in writing and all of that. But for me, it was very simply the depth of his love stories and how true to how they could really touch you, and how they're really reflected in so many of our own lives, and how he really was able to plumb to depths.
Here, I would like to bring in his favorite translator, Professor Ashley, Rebasa. He was his favorite translator, and I think we owe a lot to Rebasa for actually allowing us to be able to read his work. Marquez had a lot to say about Rebasa, and
Yes.
What was it about him that he really liked so much?
No, I think it's. I'm guessing also because what he said about the high words of praise, because no translator has won that kind of recognition,
yes.
right?
Yes.
People were queuing up to buy this book in translation, and which doesn't happen.
Because many times, the flavor, the gist, it gets lost in translation. Yeah. But here, he has attributed a lot of his success to his translator.
Yeah, because that. To render, like the question that he himself said, repeated a lot of times, like how do we make our lives believable? And in that, what is the language? In another language, how is it going to communicate? But it communicated in terms of not as a tale of, okay, this is a book that's written about this part of the world or this kind of a village, Macondo and all that. It actually became sensational, and like I said, there were socio-economic, political, ideological reasons why it became sensational the way it is. It did. But also at the same time, there is a way in which the excitement about it has to be because for an English reader, for an English novel reader who's trained in a certain way, this is communicating. You are actually writing against a style of writing, and that book becomes a sensation.
Talking of style of writing, let me quickly ask you this. Ira talks about how the whole concept of love, even if it's a dark love story, even if it's a melancholic love story, it is love, and how that transcended, and how she could read it hundreds and hundreds of times. We also talked about his language, his flair for prose, and how he could just describe an entire village and you felt you were in your own village. But other than that, how do you think today's generation reading his book in this decade, how can they really relate to his writing, given the geopolitics?
I'll give you a personal experience. When I was teaching Chronicle of a Death Foretold, I was teaching it through the 1984 Sikh riots that happened in this very city, right? So the question is, you're all there, and how could you be spectators for such a massive murder in the capital of India when you knew it was happening? And what made you so dehumanized? What made you just spectators to this horrific act? So that's exactly what Chronicle of a Death Foretold is about. Because when Pinochet came to power in Chile in 1973, Marquez said, till he steps down, still people make him step down from his
He's
dictatorship.
not going
I'm
to
not
write.
going to write.
Right.
But he
Let me quickly go back to Ira. We are having a bit of a connectivity problem. Ira, last comments from you about the man, about the one of the greatest writers who ever lived.
Well,
Sorry? Your
he
voice is
definitely is one of the greatest writers that ever lived. Love in the Time of Cholera remains. You know, I read that book when I was first 13 or 14, and now I'm 28, and I've read it maybe 15 times. And I think whenever I stopped reading, I go back to that book to start reading again, you know, because I know that book will take me right into a world. But the
So
man
his
may
writing
know
has
more.
encouraged you further as a writer. That's what you're saying.
Yes, and the man maybe no more, but his words are immortal, you know? And I
Right.
think as a writer, that's what you do. You create immortal characters which will, you know, who will never die. And I think maybe that's why sometimes writers are writers.
All right. Ira, thank you so much for joining us on the conversation. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
your valuable comments. Let us now, we are going to try and get back to Amit as well, and maybe Pranav.
Can I just finish?
Yes, we were, sorry, we were talking about.
Yeah. So the 1984.
He said he would.
Yeah, how did this happen? So he said he wouldn't
He
write.
wouldn't write, yes.
So and then he saw that he wasn't stepping down. You know, Pinochet was continuing. So why? So he wrote a novel about a person getting killed for nothing, and everyone knew about it. Everyone thought something would happen, and somebody would stop him, and no one did. The murder happened,
Right.
and then everyone talks about that day as the day of the calamity, the day of the mishap happened. So what happens is you become just a viewer of your own life, and then suddenly you like, you know, it could have been avoided, and then it's not a chronicle of a death foretold, it's actually a murder. He's saying it's naturalized because you're not doing what you should be doing. So when you're talking about fascism, the rise of fascism anywhere in India, then you are actually reminded of this thing that from a person,
that is
from an
how
individual,
it is still contemporary. His
from an
writing is so
individual,
contemporary.
you become a follower, you become part of a crowd, you become a part of a mass base. So then, and you become like you are connected by the spectacle, like the you know, viewers of a football match. You're all sitting and you share that match, but nothing else with your surroundings. So that is where I think, and that's also goes to the, he's able to talk about this, like, you know, we are able to like, I'm able to teach Marquez through 1984 or any other writer in India, because he has understood in modern modern democratic processes what is being done, and what are its historical origins, what are its practical problems and contemporary issues. He has actually rendered it most sincerely and most craftily. That's the way I would want to think of Marquez as a historian.
Okay, let me go back to Amit. Amit, you have been following Assistant Professor Ashley as he's, you know, getting into the very depths of his style of writing. Let me have a last comment from you. Are you in fact planning to write an obituary? Are you planning to write? Are you planning to vent out your, because I can make out you're a very a huge fan of Marquez. Are you going to put this down on paper?
Yeah, for sure. I've posted a small post on my Facebook page, and for sure today I'll be doing a blog which will be dedicated to this great writer and this great man. And last comment on the show would be, not only we need people like him who are great writers, but also if you look at his life, his level of conviction, his grit, his determination was so high. I wish if we had 15, 20 or 100 people more like him, and with this handful of guys more on our side, I'm sure this society and this country and this world would have been a better place.
All right. Amit, thank you so much. Stay with us, stay with us. In fact, we might have more to talk about. In fact, various celebrities have reacted, to his demise. Let me try and get you some of those reactions. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has tweeted, and he says, 1,000 years of solitude and sadness for the death of the biggest Colombian of all time. Solidarity and condolences to Gabo and his family. recently. You have actress Mia Farrow, who has said, R.I.P. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, awe and gratitude. 100 years of solitude, love in the time of cholera. Author Patrick Ness has posted, 100 Years of Solitude is one of the key books of my entire life. R.I.P. Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this has been trending on Twitter, of course, soon after the news broke. We also have some more tweets which we will be bringing into you very soon. Let's talk a little bit. We were talking about his politics. You know, he was a friend of Castro, but he also disagreed with him several times, though how that was reported in the media is controversial, but he did differ with Castro several times. What are your views on that?
See, I think if you're dealing with somebody like Marquez, who
Yes.
has such a comprehensive view of, like I said, history, politics, and people and their lives and emotions,
Right.
the day-to-day political positions are going to be, to give you a lot of problem, and it did. Because, for example, when Marquez was silent on some of the atrocities of the Cuban government, I mean, Susan Sontag has said that. So there's a certain way in which and at some point you are to ask the question. It's a sad question to be asked, and because Marquez became such a towering figure, and that's what I was talking about earlier. You are used as a messenger between two governments. One is America, one is Cuba. I mean, you know, which are actually at war, at loggerheads in many ways. So, you know, if you have that kind of something like this happened to Edward Said, because he was trying to negotiate between, America and Palestine, huge thing. So the public intellectuals of that range and public figures of that kind of range will have these problems. So I think the way media looks at it is like, okay, the Marquez is now towing the line.
It's almost like people expect you to do something, and then you're attacked either way.
And then you go and look at one or two steps, because, like, and it happens, like, you can't say, to a politician that you can't look at every aspect of his or her life, which will happen. But as a writer, there are all kinds of contradictions that he brings in, and he lives through that. And I don't think, if he asks that question, how could there be contradictions?
Maybe it's a bit unfair to do that.
If he was a man who told you that life is about contradictions and you have to deal with them to move on.
Let's talk. Let's go across quickly to literature student Pranav. Pranav, your final comments on Marquez.
Almost everything significant has already been told by Ashley, so I can hardly add to that. But
yes,
I mean, what
a very in-depth analysis, and I'm very grateful to him. But definitely, as a student yourself, as a student of literature, the awe of the man.
The aura of the man lies in the fact that he combines politics and aesthetics in a way which is intelligible to people anywhere suffering in the world. And that is the biggest accomplishment that any writer can have in this birthday.
Great. Thank you so much. I think those were wonderful final comments. It put very, very concisely. Thank you so much, Pranav, for joining in on the conversation. I would like to also thank Amit for joining in. All of you have, come across as huge admirers of the man and his work. And Ashley, I would also like to thank you. I would like to, in fact, say that despite we were talking of ideologies of the US and, Cuba being, so different, yet President Bill Clinton himself said that he could not put down 100 Years of Solitude, so much so that he was reading that book in his law classes. Yeah. So that kind of an appeal that the man had in his writing is, I think, something that generations will enjoy for many more years to come. Yes, so with that, we come to the end of the conversation. Amit, thank you so much for joining. Pranav, thank you so much for joining. And Ashley, it was great having you in our studio. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like talking about a man who you yourself admire so much. Thank you so much. All right. Take care.